kind of bellwethers or canaries and coal mines. Bellwether is a complicated thing because they changed the Wikipedia for that, so nobody knows what it means anymore. But
The term bellwether?
yeah, they rewrote the they rewrote the Wikipedia entry for that the other day, so that you can't figure out that now you see bellwether counties used to predict the voting outcome, but now no. Here's all is about now is that the times bellwether counties have been wrong about the outcome.
But you mean it in the prediction?
Yes, I think
What are the other two? So you said
Gamergate and Evergreen State College.
Okay.
Gamergate was, of course, about the media aspect, but it was with video gamers, so nobody paid attention to it because if you either game or you don't care about gaming. There's really no middle ground there. And so everybody just thought it was a bunch of dorks with anime avatars fighting on Twitter, but it was actually a very serious
A bunch of dorks. It was. It was a bunch of dorks with avatars fighting on Twitter. That's exactly what it fucking was. Oh, and harassing women. We can't forget that part. Like, there were real harms to Gamergate. But it fucking was. It fucking was a bunch of dorks.
But he said it was also serious. I love his other example, right? So it was Elevator Gate, Gamergate, and what happened at Evergreen College. So, Jesus Christ.
It happened, and it's an important model for what's going on right now because it was all about crooked journalism and the way that they hid the evidence and the way that they smeared people. And so there's a lot that the Gamergaters have to offer. And Evergreen, of course, is a closed system institution. So you have now a social movement, you have a journalism kind of phenomenon, and then you have a closed system institution as the kind of three canaries of the woke coal mine, as I've referred to them.
Why do you...
So I want to pause there just because I keep making these connections and I don't know how well they're sticking, but like notice that what he's bringing up here is the exact same points that the neo-reactionaries bring up, which is that the left has somehow infiltrated all of our like cultural things, right? They're taking over culture in gaming. They took over culture in atheism conferences. They invaded our university institutions. Not only that, Gamergate was largely the result of I wouldn't say largely the result of, but was taken, I guess, direct. Like I'm not sure how to characterize this, but Milo Yiannopoulos played a big role in shaping the movement. And did so, and there was emails that leaked. There's a great BuzzFeed article, you should go check it out, where they conspired to bring sort of like neo-reactionaries and neo-Nazi talking points and help craft those in a more mainstream sense, and used Gamergate as like a wedge issue to introduce this topic. That's what they did. There's emails showing that they intentionally planned to do this, and James Lindsay is like feeding into it here and giving it credence, saying like, yes, this proved that this cultural leftist movement has taken over these cultural institutions and they're destroying them from the inside. It is the same neo-reactionary, neo-Nazi fucking talking points that they all use. And yet he wants to sit here and try to tell you that he's not one of them. He's just worried about liberal society. That's all he's worried about. When it's like, no, you buy into a lot more of this shit, and we'll connect a bit of that near the end of this as well.
I use the term closed system institution rather than just saying the university, just so I understand.
You mean Evergreen itself?
Well, it seemed to me like you said that the three canaries in the coal mine, or the three bellwethers, are the new atheism movement and what happened to it, as you just described. Evergreen State.
Yeah, canaries in the woke coal mine.
You said Gamergate. It sounded like you were saying Gamergate revealed a problem in the media, and then you were like, in other words, the reason Gamergate is important is that it reflects problems in the media. And then I thought you were going to say the reason Evergreen State is important is that it reflects a problem in the university. But instead you said closed system institution.
Sure. Oh yeah, because I want to be careful. Because Evergreen has not been replicated at any other university in full scale. And Evergreen is, in many regards, a corner case as far as universities go. It's a very small college. It had an experimental pedagogy from the beginning. It's kind of cloistered in a sense away from everything else. But no other university has properly collapsed the way that Evergreen has. Now, I will definitely say that what's happened at Evergreen is indicative of what could happen to any university that's not propped up by fantastic amounts of money. I mean, Evergreen State College still exists, mostly from what I understand, and I may be mistaken about this, but from what I understand, because Olympia, Washington, the state legislature or state government of Washington is propping up Evergreen. It's keeping it afloat where it can't make ends meet anymore. So when you look at a school like Harvard, for example, that has has a well of an endowment that's billions and billions deep, it's not likely that Harvard's going to ever go evergreen. They have too much money to rest on. But the pressures that we're seeing a massive experiment, and Evergreen is going to be indicative of it. It's different in a sense that it was a very different kind of school, and it is very small and closed. But we will see. We will see. I think the university should be taking the example of Evergreen much more seriously than they do if you want the truth. But I won't be so audacious as to say every university below a certain endowment size is going to end up going Evergreen if they don't stop. It might, but I don't know.
How much did the controversy...
So I think he's going to hit on another point in a second here. I just wanted to point out, if you don't know yet, Evergreen College was the incident where Brett Weinstein was mad because a bunch of students wanted to go to this, or he was mad that there was this thing saying that students who were white had to go to this like racial training off the campus for this like particular day that was supposed to be about social justice in some capacity. And he raised a stink, and then people protested him. And then eventually he quit and blames it on the fact that like the university didn't stick up for him or some shit like this. And now Brett Weinstein, went on Tucker Carlson and has become a grifter like the rest of them. And we've covered him interviewing Jordan Peterson and all that shit, right? So like all these people again are connected. Evergreen College is a weird college. They don't have majors, and it was part of their like radical like pedagogy. So it's like a weird thing, and a lot of people don't know how to like properly like sell the university and characterize it, because it has this. It's supposed to be a kind of like left wing radical school. Okay. And if people want to go to it, they're free to go to it. That's like, fun America, freedom, money, fun stuff, So the thing that's like annoying here is this claim that somehow Evergreen is collapsing, that like, yes, of course, like Harvard is a fucking old institution that was like bolstered by a lot of rich money. Same with all the other Ivy League schools. That's tons of fun. Tons of other state colleges are supported by public funding. He makes it sound like it's an extremely weird thing, but a lot of state college, in fact, all state colleges, which is the reason why they're state colleges, are funded by the governments of those colleges. So like the state governments of those colleges. So, I mean, James is trying to make some like weird point about that, as if that's evidence that somehow Evergreen in particular is failing. I see no reason to signal out Evergreen as failing in comparison to all other state colleges that also have funding issues. And we'll follow up on that point in a quick second here.
Surrounding the Brett Weinstein incident hurt Evergreen just in terms of its ability to attract students?
Last I saw, if I'm not mistaken, that their student enrollment is down almost 60%. But I might have the numbers backwards. It might only be 40, but it's somewhere in that range. So they've lost roughly half of their students, and I believe it's slightly more.
Regarding new atheism,
60%. Could you imagine a school losing 60% of enrollment from one year to the next? That's clearly not true.
It is a pretty big drop over the last 4 years.
To Evergreen?
Like looking at, what was that?
Yeah, but so I wanted to contextualize that.
I just wanted to get your thoughts on something, which is,
because it is true, Evergreen has dropped. But here's enrollment stats for the entire country for all universities, not just state colleges. Look at that line. Enrollment is plummeting across the board over years.
No, that's
Why
not true.
do you think it is?
That's ridiculous.
Could it be that the price of tuition is going through the fucking roof?
No,
we went
absolutely
through economic
not.
collapses and people can't afford homes and they're going into debt. Why do you think enrollment at universities is going down the tubes?
Sorry, that's ridiculous. You're making too much sense. You can't be saying that.
But of course, what these assholes do is they home in on just what's happening at Evergreen and go, look at the number drop. Therefore, there's something to do with Evergreen in particular that explains the drop. I mean, also ignoring the fact that notice how there's like an even more steep decline here from 2019 till 2021. Maybe because there was something that happened. I'm not sure what happened in the last year. What has happened? It's almost like there was this thing that like affected the entire world.
I don't think so.
COVID?
Trump? You mean Trump? No, oh yeah, COVID. Yeah, we had that thing. Okay.
It's like even if you analyze the last year at Evergreen, you can't blame that on like the school itself and what happened to Brett Weinstein. It's the fucking pandemic that has affected every university because people are like, do I want to pay tuition for online school? You know, and people are making these decisions. Like it's so easily debunked. Like these people, their talking points are so sad and depressing for how easy it is to debunk them. But of course, everyone's going to point to the fact that I made fun of James Lindsay, and they're never going to focus on the fact that James Lindsay just fucking, for one, made an obvious stupid claim, which was that the 60% enrollment drop off, when really I think they went from something like 3,900 to, I think over the last couple of years, they're now at about the 3,000 range. So
4,400 to 2,200.
22? Where did you see those numbers? I did not find those numbers at all.
It's on their webpage. You can look up the Evergreen historical enrollment reports.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's that this maybe the numbers I was seeing is you're getting the drop from last year to like the COVID drop to drop it all the way down to 2,200.
No, I'm looking from total student headcount and FT for the fall quarters 1971 to 2020.
Interesting.
So like their peak was like 20. God, their peak was 2009 when they had 4,891, and then in 2020 they were at 2,281.
Yeah, so I mean, they're following trends. I mean, it could have had something to do with the Brett Weinstein thing, but at the same time,
I mean, yeah, if you've had fucking Brett Weinstein, I'm not fucking going there.
Yeah. Well, you would think in that case, if he leaves, the enrollment should go up.
Yeah. Like I wouldn't argue against like cultural flashpoints at a university definitely impact enrollment. Like they 100% do. I'm not discounting that, but I also don't think, as you're saying, like their drops in enrollment aren't solely to do with whatever the fuck happened there. Yeah. And it's not even an indication that like, oh, Evergreen is woke, so people don't want to go, right? Because as you're saying, it's a fucking lefty university. It's a lefty college.
Yeah, it's
like
the woke
if anything,
who would originally go there.
Yeah, if anything, it's like you don't have like the safety of the students really at heart if you're going to allow this for so and so many years. And then it's also like the pandemic, and it's also all this other stuff.
That actually makes a lot more sense. That like if there is a reaction, it's not the reaction of people going, well, I don't want to go. Look at how they treated Brett Weinstein. So like that, I'm like ashamed of that university. It'll be like, yeah, look at how you allowed Brett Weinstein to exist there for this long, doing all those shitty things he was doing. I'm not going to go there. You know?
No, and as a recent example, you're probably going to see that with the University of North Carolina, with how they handled Nicole Hannah-Jones, famous for the 1619 Project, in her tenure decision.
Yeah.
Like they finally reversed it, and she said, no, I'm going to go to Howard. I guarantee you that's going to have a direct impact on UNC's enrollment over the next few years, and it's going to have an impact on Howard's enrollment over the next few years.
Yeah.
There's probably going to be a lot of people who transfer out, and that might also be part of what you're looking at from the Evergreen numbers, because it's just headcount, it's not admissions, right? You might be looking at a bunch of people who transferred out after the Brett Weinstein stuff.
That's true. That is very true. But either way, it is if it is a factor, it's one factor in the many, including the tuition increases, including the standard drop-offs that have happened since 2008 when we had the recession.
I actually had never, I mean, I didn't follow New Atheism that closely, or I would say I followed the debates with great interest, but I didn't follow the the collapse or the
like this
decline of the movement. And so I was not familiar with this argument that identity politics related dynamics had led to its demise. My perspective is more that the actual ideas lost currency in the culture as figures like, most notably Jordan Peterson, argued that religion is important and sort of tried to rescue a religious worldview. So, like Jordan Peterson has a pretty influential critique of the New Atheists, and it seemed like he captured more of the zeitgeist around the middle of the 2010s than the New Atheists did. Like, in other words, it seemed to me that New Atheists actually just started to lose a lot of important arguments. And people were more interested in the value that religion provides and how I might reconnect to religion and maybe take religion seriously, albeit more metaphorically than people did during the Middle Ages, which is sort of what Jordan Peterson is offering and articulating. So that was my perspective on the decline of the New Atheist movement. And I'm just curious if you agree with that.
I think there.
So I love this guy's thing. He thinks that what ended New Atheism, or what caused like a wedge in there, was the fact that Jordan Peterson just won the battle of ideas. Jordan Peterson won the battle of ideas, and therefore New Atheism toppled. Wonderful. Thank you, Jordan Peterson.
Christianity won.
Yeah. Yep, it won the battle of ideas, and that was it.
There was actually a timing gap that you're not really aware of, since you pay attention to some of the arguments, but you didn't pay attention to the ugly politics. My perception was already that by 2014, which was before Peterson had risen to any prominence, that the New Atheism movement was on the severe decline, and it wasn't.
Thank you, Progressive American. That's pretty aggressive. Heyo, fuckers. Well, thank you, and
howdy, fuckers.
Yeah. We I think we're working out. I will be Progressive American, and I will be having a chat at some point on their channel at some point. So go follow them as well. And I think Elron has left, actually. They said that they were going to go to sleep at 10. I was expecting them to say goodbye, but they were just like, fuck it, I'm out. They're gone. So it'll just be Vienna and I from here on out.
If it had anything to do with the quality of the arguments, it was that the arguments were the same argument over and over again. I have a very different view of what the New Atheism movement was trying to achieve than most.
That was the point I was making earlier, which is that James has the same idea, which is like he got tired of the atheism movement because they were just having the same argument over and over again. So he agrees with Tim, me, Elron about why interest in atheism or these atheistic conferences sort of like dwindled.
Most people understand. I think it was actually an attempt to break something that I would genuinely say bordered on Christian supremacy. In particular, it was less Catholic, but some Catholic, but mostly the Protestant grip, where I very distinctly remember growing up in the South, surrounded by Protestants, where it was extraordinarily taboo. You certainly would not admit publicly that you didn't believe in God. And
just in case you got lost there, because I made some pauses, what he's talking about here is how this is what he thinks atheism was like doing, right? It was fighting what he described as Christian supremacy. Okay. Now I agree with this, especially in the American and Canadian context. A large part of the atheist movement was pushing back against Christian supremacy in these countries. I think a lot of it also had to do with a reaction to what happened in after 9/11. But also, yes, there was issues with the Christian right in America that also sort of was a reason why a lot of people were pushing for atheism or in atheistic movements.
That particular thing, the fundamentalism aspect, that was so prevalent as I think what it was actually doing. And atheism as a thing that some people had become broadly accepted at some point between these years, between 2004 when Sam Harris wrote End of Faith which is arguably when the movement kind of started. 2005, he wrote an Atheist Manifesto, which was a very short piece. I forgot what it was published in.
I like Tim's comment here. Man, wouldn't it be ironic if he now worked with Christian supremacist groups? Yeah, that would be ironic, Tim. And also, Progressive American, you said, I would argue that this religious right issue is much older than 9/11. That is true, but the new atheism movement was directly a result of what happened on September 11th. So I don't think you would have had the let's say, there would not have been such a interest in atheist literature if not for September 11th. It was almost like after September 11th, you had Sam Harris's book got published, then Dawkins, Dennett, Christopher Hitchens, and then the atheism movement sort of like grew, right? And those 4 books largely were a response to 9/11. So even though you're right that the Christian supremacy thing was existent, the issue there was given that Christian supremacy was such a predominant force in America, it was hard for atheism or atheistic literature to break through. I think before New Atheism, you had what's her name? Mary O'Hare, something O'Hare. She was a part of the American Atheists. I think she founded American Atheists, and she was often ridiculed on TV. Like she was brought out as like, look at this crazy atheist, and she would go up there and spout a whole bunch of stuff. And she had her own problems. Her life is an interesting life all on its own. It was made into a movie that you can go watch. Fascinating character, problematic character, but like that's what the atheism movement was prior to the growth of new atheism after September 11th. So it was brought out as like an easy target for Christian people to be like, look at those crazy atheists, and it never got a footing. Publishers would never publish their books, etc. And now the market exists because of the popularity of those books that were published by atheists following September 11th.
And then by 2015, when Jordan Peterson started to emerge onto the scene and started talking about something very different. So it could just be partly that there was success in what turned out to be the real driving force. This happens with a lot of movements, liberalizing movements, is that they achieve their liberalized goal, and then there's still activist goals that the activists are still interested in, but the liberal people in the middle just lose interest because mission accomplished.
So what he's saying here, this I find very, very weird, but it gets to Tim's point. He's claiming that the atheist movement, which is its prime focus, according to Lindsay, was Christian supremacy, had succeeded at their goals of ending Christian supremacy. You know, it's not like you have Christian radicals right now sitting on the Supreme Court removing all restrictions to Christian supremacy in the American country. I don't think we did either.
It's gone.
Yeah.
Christianity's done. It's completed.
It's completed.
Over.
Well, the thing, and he's feeding into another thing that a lot of these people like to say, which is this idea that like, oh, these Marxist critical theory feminist people, they just want to be negative Nancy's, and they just want to critique. And even though all our problems have been solved, they continue on to critique and be negative. And like this is an argument you hear about a lot of people, which is that like that it was a big talking point in like anti-feminist circles, which was this idea that like the patriarchy has been destroyed, women's emancipation has been completely successful, the sexes are completely equal, we don't have to worry about that all this stuff. But the issue was all these feminist organizations and societies and networks still existed, but they no longer had an enemy to attack, so they started making up stuff to attack, right? Because they needed to continue, they wanted the funding to keep coming in, and so they can keep attacking. This was an argument you heard from like a lot of people in the anti-feminist community, when it's like, I don't know, we went through a whole thing about like how all these people started coming out feminists in the atheist movement and were sexually harassing people. When then we had the Me Too movement and all this stuff, and it's like, maybe we haven't beaten patriarchy yet. Maybe we haven't fully reached our emancipation. Yet people like James Lindsay, white dudes like James Lindsay, are going to come in and be like, guess what? We've solved it. We've solved patriarchy. We've solved Christian supremacy. The world is perfect. Everything is happy. Why are you still complaining? And it's like, I don't know. Is the world perfect? It doesn't feel perfect to me.
So that's
The
certainly
world is
possible.
perfect. The world is as perfect as it will ever get. We exist in a rational system that favors outcomes. We live in a world that is as equal as it could ever possibly be.
That's right. So why fight anymore? Why fight anymore?
Just gotta pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Come on.
I have to explain to my students what a Christian is. These Zoomers have never even seen one after the success of the atheist movement. Oh, Tim.
Possibly part of its decline. But when you saw up close just how toxic the internal environment was in the movement apparatus, it becomes very difficult to say what would have happened, but it becomes very easy to say that it wasn't helping anything. So if you have to have some kind of momentum, both in terms of, like I said, social energy and in terms of financial resources, kind of like a snowball rolling down the hill, to keep a movement going, to keep a social movement alive and vibrant, that was collapsing. That fell apart independently of any of this other stuff, and it was driven by the woke aspect. So of course, there was probably many things that contributed, but I think that the decisive, bloodletting strike was around Elevator Gate, and all of a sudden everything polarizing around the issue of women in atheism and social justice in atheism.
I think one other perhaps problem with new atheism is that it's more negative than positive in the sense.
Oh, it's a critical theory movement. It's a critical movement by design. It's criticizing hegemonic power. And this is actually a very interesting point.
It's like it's not giving direction to people or even meaning to people.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
So we're going to get into some critical theory here, and this connects back to his criticisms of critical race theory and all that fun stuff. But he's going to talk about how atheism itself was a critical movement because it was criticizing hegemonic power. Now, here's the thing: is like critical theory. He actually kind of gets a sort of like aspect of critical theory, which I think is correct, which is the idea that like the point of critical theory is to analyze and critique the power structures and the systems that are in place with a goal of like emancipation attached to it, right? Like it's not just critique, but it's also critique towards emancipation, right? Now the funny thing is he thinks that like that's the problem with critical theory a lot of the time. Yet in a way, he himself is critical theory. He's engaging in critical theory. He thinks that these movements are going to destroy. It's kind of a reaction in the sense that like his move is not to critically analyze to go to a later stage and emancipate people. He thinks that we're already emancipated and we don't have to go any further. So his critique of critical theory, his critical theory analysis of critical theory is to suggest that like the move towards keeping emancipation is by like knocking down the critical theory stuff. Which is itself a kind of weird conservative style critical theory in a way, very weird.
the thing is there's a criticism is built into liberalism, right? The entire process of the Enlightenment was a critical process in many regards. It was, no, we're not going to take the authority of kings, and no, we're not going to take the authority of priests and just go with that. We're now going to look at the world. We're now going to look at the world for truth. We're going to base our policy and our thoughts and our our ideas and our plans as much on that as possible. We're not going to look to kings for political authority. We're now going to look to the people that the government represents or that the government serves. And so there was this huge switch. This was a truth to power strike, the size of which has not been replicated. Whatever the woke today or whatever anybody wants to pretend, truth to power when you were going up against the Catholic Church and the monarchies of Europe, that's next level. That's big. I mean, they literally had inquisitions to keep this going.
I mean, there's an element here in which, like, yes, the battles towards democracy and liberalism that occurred in the 1700s and into the early 1800s, these emancipatory movements towards liberalism, they were hard fought. There was bloodshed, all that fun stuff. He's absolutely right there. But then he's going to be like, we're all done. There's nothing equivalent to today. But it's like, you don't think the emancipatory struggle for those who are exploited isn't like what about the people we're exploiting in other countries due to our capitalist exploitation of them? Do you think they could just easily like defeat that? Like, have we won? Have we succeeded in doing that yet? As like capitalism ended, like he makes this like it's just a cakewalk. Like why? Like all these people, they're just complaining about being poor. Just get over it.
I personally am just glad to hear James Lindsay defending the gains of the French Revolution and specifically Maximilien Robespierre. Just glad that we're hearing it finally. Like he obviously it corrected that Robespierre didn't go far enough, but whatever.
It's just like yeah, like though they were messy, but it's just like I don't. It's weird because he's making it about like I don't know, that women struggling for further emancipation, further freedom, it's somehow an easier jump than it was fighting the monarchy or something. Like I'm not sure what the point is. That like to me it still is like emancipation still seems hard because we still have assholes like you pushing back, or we have reactionaries that are so angry about it they're willing to storm a Capitol building to vote for people like Donald Trump who are like harming people. Like reactionaries are still happening. They're murdering people. They're shooting people. We have right-wing mass killings because these people are reacting to people demanding rights and trying for further emancipation. Like, what do you think is the like? This thing is going to get worse before it gets better in a lot of ways. Sadly, I wish we could skip all that bullshit, but we're going to have people like you fighting us the entire way. And eventually they're going to get mad in some capacity. Like, just because like it's not as bloodshed right now as it could be in the future when whiteys like you decide that you're going to like fuck everyone over. Like, we still have police that march in the fucking streets and beat the shit out of protesters. We had an entire summer where police were just beating the shit out of people. Sure, they haven't resorted to shooting us yet, like at the protests. But how far away are we, Such a stupid argument. And granted, I would love if it could happen tomorrow and we all just like hold hands, sing songs, and then we're all emancipated and it's all great. I would prefer that, but I don't think that is necessarily where everything is going to happen.
And excommunication, and you look at what happened. Not that Martin Luther was in totality a great guy, but you look at what happened to Martin Luther when he dared to challenge the idea of indulgences and the corruptions in the Catholic Church. He didn't have a nice, pleasant remainder of his years after that for quite some time. He was,
it's
in fact,
almost like
hiding.
Religious supremacy is not great.
In Wartburg Castle because his life was forfeit. So that was a truth to power thing, and that's in liberalism already, right? But there's this point where you go too far. The liberal aspect of a liberalizing movement is no longer relevant because the if you want to call it liberation, if you want to call it social change, whatever you want to call it, has been properly achieved. And then, of course, there's the activist remnant that doesn't understand the difference. And so,
Just so I'm clear,
You know what? Like, see what he's saying. We've achieved emancipation. Go no farther.
He's calling Luther a liberal?
Yeah. Well, I mean, he was fighting.
That man wanted to kill every Jew in Europe. Like,
I think what he's trying to say is like there was an aspect of what Protestantism was, which was a liberalization, if you were, about how people approach the religious text that freed it from the authority of the Roman Catholic Church. To that extent, there might be an aspect of liberalization that I think you could probably tie into the liberal movements that would come after. But you are right, like, sort of calling him a liberal figure is a bit weird, considering how far back he was in that process of liberalization, if that makes sense.
I want James Lindsay to say a year that all this was achieved. Like,
Yeah, what?
like give me a date and a time and a place that it was just like, boom, it's done, we're over.
I can't remember if it's in this video or the next one, but he does say that the civil rights movement in the 60s was successful. So my guess is like that would be him saying that it was still, we still hadn't achieved it in the 60s. We still needed some sort of struggle. But now we've achieved it since then, maybe? I don't know. We've achieved it.
What the fuck does that have to do with Luther? Like,
Yeah. No,
why go back that far?
Because he's saying that, like, what he's trying to do is say all the people fighting for emancipation today are just like woke kids on college campuses who aren't really fighting for anything and aren't really at risk. Where the people who had to fight for emancipation back then, whether it was from the Roman Catholic Church, from the monarchies, or whatever, they suffered way worse consequences, like the Inquisition and bloodshed and murder and religious oppression and stuff like this. Where like today, according to Lindsay, that's just not going to happen. And the points that I was making earlier was like, you don't know that it's not going to happen. The bloodshed in the streets isn't happening right now. It could. Especially when you get sufficient reactionary pushback to the sort of emancipatory struggles that are occurring right now.
It is, though. Like, the bloodshed is happening.
So let me rephrase that, because I also mentioned the fact of, like, I think he's speaking purely from an American context. And you might still be able to make your argument there. But even there's bloodshed happening around the world having to do with imperialism and capitalist exploitation. So like it still is existing at a level that I think rivals what occurred back in that time period. But there is an element in which, especially in the West, in their conception of the West, where yes, I think like, you know, union activists are not being shot in the street right now, like they were in the early union struggles. But that doesn't mean that it couldn't eventually get to that point again, right? As like we pointed out on the podcast, you have people running over union activists with their cars and stuff like this. And so like violence does escalate. And it could escalate to a point where, yes, we're having union activists being shot in the street again. In our context, obviously they're still being shot in the street, not in Canada and not in America, right? Which is, again, like he thinks of the rest of the world as like, I don't know, they're just like Darfur, and we can just ignore them. They're all third world. They're all problematic. And he probably thinks that they're problematic because of race or like other shit. Like, who knows what he thinks. But
it's also like his conceptualization starts in Europe, obviously, but at some point it has to shift to North America and just like ignore the European context entirely as well. Like, because the analogy only works with that crazy right-wing view of America. It doesn't work out if you look at anywhere else that isn't like, I almost said, true north, strong and free, or whatever. But I don't know what the American slogan is right now. Freedom.
Yeah,
July
freedom.
4th.
Hamburgers and apple pies.
Yeah. Boston Tea Party.
No, it's very
like
it's very I mean, but it's self-centric. Like, he's been through this whole conversation, you know? Atheism, the whole movement was ruined because they didn't cater to my needs and my demands as a white dude. And you know, I don't care about the rest of the world because they're just backwards, third world, they're icky, yucky people. All I care about is, like, right now, America is great. And I want to make it great again because, again, James Lindsay, Trump supporter, wants to make it great again from all these critical theorists that are ruining it for him in his experience, right? Yep.
Yeah.
Who is the activist remnant and with regard to new atheism?
The activists, okay, so there were people who wanted to break the idea of Christian fundamentalism, or Christian, I should say, supremacy in the United States, right?
And you would count yourself among those people?
Yes.
And you had personal experience with
Yes.
a sort of dominant Christian worldview?
I had a very interesting experience growing up religiously and then going into that, but yes, certainly. I grew up Catholic in a Protestant South, so I was persecuted religiously for that, although I didn't even understand what the relevance of it was, so it didn't like impact me emotionally, but I certainly knew that kids were throwing rocks at me and calling me a Mary worshiper.
Wow.
Yeah. And so,
See, I didn't realize the Protestant-Catholic divide was so inflaming passions, you know?
Well,
Because it was really
it wasn't
important
really
in the
adults.
first half of the 17th century.
yeah, it wasn't really in adults. It was it's the kind of like Lord of the Flies crap kids do.
Yeah. So I have to pause here and reflect on the fact of him downplaying the harassment experienced by others. Meanwhile, he admitted to the question about whether he counted himself in as being one of the movements fighting for emancipation against Christian supremacy. And he agreed with that, saying that he was a part of that remnant of the atheist community fighting against Christian supremacy. And he brings it back to his own personal experience, where kids were hurling insults at him merely for the fact that he was a Catholic in a Protestant neighborhood, and referred to him as a Mary lover and were throwing stones at him or something like this. So he can relate to his own experience for being harassed for like some sort of like category that was imposed on him by the other, but can't sort of understand why women don't like being harassed at conferences. Like, it's fucking phenomenal how just utterly selfish and only aware of his personal experience he is, which again is a common theme throughout conservatism. I mean, it's a common theme to suggest that conservatives only care about the issue of gay marriage when they have a gay child and realize that, oh, this is what gay people are like, and then support gay causes, but only if they have a child who's gay. It's just so self-centered. It's like they can't. There's something about the conservative brain that makes them incapable of perceiving other people and empathizing with their experiences. Even though he should be able to empathize, given what the story that he just explained, which seems like, I mean, he tries to downplay it, but it seems tragic. He was bullied for being a Catholic. You know?
I didn't ever see that kind of thing from adults. And then I slowly abandoned my faith. And then I saw the other side of that. But mostly where my experience being atheist in the South was being silenced. It wasn't being called names. It wasn't being chased down. It was feeling like I couldn't speak
Somewhat
freely.
the way a lot of
Almost like women who felt like they couldn't speak up at these atheist conferences because they felt like if they spoke up, they would be attacked.
Yeah. Just like the total lack of self-awareness there. Wow.
Yeah.
The other thing was like his focus on children being like the Lord of the Flies. And it's like, one, we have spotted a middle-class boy.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what fucking school you went to where it was like everybody turning on each other, Lord of the Flies style. But like, also just like the kind of, that's how he views humanity type of thing. Like, he views people as totally willing and able to turn on each other and brutalize one another, but then like can't understand why people might not want to live in that kind of world.
Yep. He can understand why he doesn't want to live in that world and why he'll fight back against it. But when other people are asking for the same demands for their own experience of harassment, he's not willing to side with them. It's so typical, sadly.
And I don't even think it's fair to say that he doesn't want to live in that world. He just wants to live in that world where he gets to side with the dominant faction. And that's what he's doing as an atheist, siding with like far right Christians. Like, he's just siding with the more dominant faction rather than like actually challenging or trying to like get out of that system for himself.
Yep. I don't even understand, because like even for him to say like some of these things are done and solved, and I don't know if he's going to bring it up again, but he talks at some point about the Freedom of Religions Foundation being something like where some of the activism is needed or good or something to that extent. And a lot of the causes that the Freedom for Religion Foundation fights are things like the Masterpiece Cake case, which went all the way up to the Supreme Court and was about whether or not a baker is allowed to whether or not a gay couple can be refused service at a bakery for a cake. And the court sided, the Supreme Court of America sided with the baker, such that it is okay to discriminate if you're a baker against gay couples. And he wants to tell you that atheism is done because the
Really?
Christian supremacy that he's talking about, yes, really, the Christian supremacy that he's talking about, he claims has been solved, doesn't exist anymore, even though the Supreme Court of America ruled against the gay couple trying to sue a baker for refusing to sell them a gay cake for their wedding. The cake is obviously not gay, but it was a cake for their gay wedding. I did call it a gay cake. Yep. So he wants to pretend like it's been solved when it's like it hasn't. And the Freedom of Religious Foundation is fighting this stuff. Like, I don't know. And like, what is the freedom? I mean, he wants to praise them to a certain extent, but like, is the Freedom of Religions Foundation now taken over by all these like critical theorists that are bad? Even though he thinks they're critical theorists for good, because Christian supremacy is a real thing to actually want to fight for emancipation, but everything else, fuck it. What an embarrassing person.
Dissidents or conservatives might feel in a liberal arts context.
Sure, right. Well, I mean, the word for this, if we can thank Gramsci for it, is hegemony. There was a Christian, in fact, a Protestant hegemony, at least in the South. If you read the books, Richard Dawkins chronicled at the time when, what was it, 2006 that the God Delusion came out, something like 44% of Americans self-professed that they believed in a literal, creation, biblical creation. And so this had a lot of cultural power. And so there were liberal people who wanted there to just be, look, some people are atheists, get over it. In the same way that the gay pride movement had people that were like, listen, some people are gay, get over it. Just like Martin Luther King and his cohorts in the civil rights movement held up signs that said, I am a man. They didn't say, I'm a black man. They didn't say Black Lives Matter. They said, I am a man. I'm just like you. And that's the liberal side of it. And there's a
Again, this was in his Progress U video too, right? It's the content of your character, Martin Luther King bullshit that every white liberal likes to recite, like as if Martin Luther King is just a super lib who didn't care about any of this shit. But again, yeah, and Tim listed off a bunch of cases there too. Hobby Lobby, Trinity Lutheran. Yeah, it's disgusting what the Supreme Court is doing. And you might think, well, what is the atheist angle here? Why would the Freedom of Religious Foundations fight a lot of these lawsuits? or I think in the Masterpiece Cake, they filed an amicus brief. Why would they stand here? Well, it's because the Supreme Court, in these cases, even that Tim's listing off here, has been siding with claiming that to force a religious person to make a cake that goes against their religion is religious discrimination, and that's why they side with religion in these cases, which overturns the separation of church and state in a lot of cases, but also removes other justifications. Like we played the clip with Jordan Peterson when we had Jim Jeffries clearly lay out, well, wasn't it good that the Supreme Court ruled that you can't discriminate based on race in terms of like, if a black person goes into your business, you can't refuse to sell them something because they're black. And a lot of people justified that based on religion as well. And yet the Supreme Court back then was like, no, you need to serve everyone equally. You can't discriminate based on race. And yet today, those laws are being removed because the Christian right in America has forced its way, manipulated elections, played shenanigans, gerrymandered all the shit, got into power, put people on the Supreme Court that are now passing these laws and rolling back all these things. And are doing it in the name of their evangelical Christian beliefs. They're put on the bench because they're supported by the Federalist Society that particularly chooses right-leaning Christian people that believe in all kinds of far-right nonsense. So for you, James Lindsay, to sit up here and pretend like that fight is over, what the fuck is wrong with you? I can't believe it. I just like what I almost want to be like, where the hell were you in all these atheist conferences that you attended? Were you just not paying attention to anything? Were you only showing up to be like, I'm going to use my super rational brain to discuss like whether or not God exists? Meanwhile, the rest of those people in those atheist communities were going, holy shit, the Christian right is transforming the courts in this country and installing Christian theocrats in positions of power. There's a book that came out around the time that all these new atheist books were coming out that I highly recommend, even though this person has kind of gone off the deep end. It's American Fascists, Their Christian Right and the War in America, which, again, there's been a long history of people documenting the Christian right and their fascist turn and them trying to destroy institutions. That book was written by Chris Hedges. It's a fantastic book, and I recommend everyone check it out if they had an opportunity to do so. Chris Hedges, let's just say I don't agree with everything he does now, but that book is fantastic.
Point where all of a sudden, that's not what's relevant anymore. So you had the atheist movement people who were interested in that, and then beyond that, maybe promoting rationality, maybe promoting skepticism in a more broad sense, whatever it was. And then you had these people who were trying to be good atheists. They had decided atheist was their identity, relevant to their identity, in fact, and they wanted to be good atheists. There was this huge argument in the circles where I was in, maybe it's only on kind of the fringes of the atheism movement, but about how to be a good atheist and what it meant to be a good atheist. I wrote a book about how this was causing there to be almost a religious-like thing within New Atheism. I called that book Everybody's Wrong About God. And I was particularly looking at the people we've already mentioned, these blogging platforms and networks, in particular, Free Thought Blogs, which hosted Atheism Plus in particular, among those. And I thought, I've been studying religious psychology, remember now, for a few years. I just stopped studying religious philosophy. I was like, this is a waste of time. And I started studying the psychology of it. And I was like, this is the same thing.
Now, why? The only thing that he said here that makes him the same thing is he said there was a bunch of people wanting to be good atheists. So somehow that becomes religion because why? They're talking about a moral good. And yet he put himself in the position of wanting to fight Christian supremacy. Isn't that a moral fight? Why is that not religious then? Because you're saying it's a moral good to prevent Christian supremacy. Why is it a moral good? And if by good atheists, they're saying things like, I want women to feel comfortable at atheist conferences, why is that religious? I mean, he offers no analysis here, other than I guess the only thing I can think here is somehow he's conflating religion with moral theorizing, which is like they don't necessarily go hand in hand. Although, like, of course, religion has its own like moral teachings. So he's like you and the only reason atheism would have like moral teachings is like this addition of humanism, which is like, okay, so we freed ourselves from Christian supremacy. What do we do now? And the idea is like maybe we want a society that's not patriarchal, that cares about other human beings, that isn't racist, like I mean, that respects trans people. Like, you know, there's other things that you could think of that once you get rid of certain aspects of religion that caused harm, what do we do to replace it? And that is an important thing to maybe think about if you're an atheist. No? But somehow, according to James Lindsay, that process of analyzing that is you're becoming a religion again, and religion is bad, I guess, even though he's working and being funded by Christian Nationalists.
Functionally speaking, this is very close to the same thing. I don't know what the deity is, but it's very close to the same thing. And that was very concerning. And so the activist remnant were the ones who wanted to push atheism as a positive good and an identity status in and of itself, and often to continue to try to milk the idea that, you know, atheists are a persecuted minority and they therefore need to be taken, you know, more seriously or whatever, as compared with, for example, what the Freedom from Religion Foundation did, which is a legal advocacy group. All they did was go around to school systems and so on, and if they had like the Ten Commandments stuck up on the wall, courthouses, they sued to get those taken out.
That is not all that they did. In fact, I'll bring it up on the screen here. Oh, look at this. FRF files amicus brief against anti-gay cake maker. Like, no, all they did was just like, don't put up the 10 Commandments in a school. Like, even just get a rudimentary understanding of the movement that you used to claim you belonged to until feminists took over. Jesus fucking Christ.
Like, no, that actually, you know, violates the freedom from religion aspect of religious liberty of people who don't believe in this particular faith, or in that case, Abrahamic faith, or people who don't believe in any faith. And so very different aspects to this. So the activists are the people who believe that the thing that they're crusading for is the right thing. And then the liberals tend to be the people who say something wrong is going on here, and once that stops, we're good.
Mm-hmm. And you would...
And so, again, once that stops, we're good. And I just want to point out again, because it is worth reiterating with the points that he's making here, that he literally works with Christian nationalists. Okay, so you don't believe me? Here, we'll I think this is a
again, count yourself
opportunity to like dive into that a bit more. Here we go. We'll see right here. So this New Discourses LLC, right? Bop. That's James Lindsay's new thing, newdiscourses.com. That's his website. It's all the stuff that he writes there. So what does it say here? Directors. James Lindsay, Peter Boghossian, and this person right here, Michael O'Fallon. Okay, who's Michael O'Fallon? Michael O'Fallon runs this wonderful thing over here. So this is Sovereign Nations. Sovereign Nations. Okay, let's look what... The About section isn't that helpful, but we'll read it anyways. Brace yourself for this. For people who critique critical theory for being... obtuse and use language weirdly, let's read this fucking thing, okay? The purpose of sovereign nations is best understood as a prolegomena to the formation of a new and not just sentimental conservative and constitutional republic. Sovereign nations serves as an exploration of the intellectual viability of the conservative political habitat with a view of establishing the groundwork for the construction and elaboration of a broader and more comprehensive vision for the movement in relation to the exegetical intent of our founders through our national founding documents. The essential precondition for a renewed conservative engagement with intellectual life is confidence in its own coherence and credibility. It is our hope to engage with the ideas and concepts that are at the center of progressivism and supranationalism without descending into ad hominem argumentation. We would seek to be upfront with our disagreements, respect their philosophical and ideological opponents, and look forward to creating common ground for open discussion. That's their about section.
Those are some words.
Let's search. So Michael, again, this is Michael O'Fallon's organization, but so far we haven't attached the two. But here he is, Michael O'Fallon. Notice that a lot of his stuff is on a critical reset. So he believes in the Great Reset idea, that there's some like let's say connections with George Soros, who's trying to like use the pandemic to make us all Marxists. And I will point out, they had a section of that in the introduction that I think they removed that mentions the open. Let me see if I can find it. Maybe it's not in this blog post. Maybe it was in something else. But they used to have a section of that introduction that would talk about George Soros's Open Society Foundation. We got a message from our founder. No, we got the coming political revolution in response to Christianity today. So part of like a lot of the work that he does is to claim that critical theory has infected the church and is teaching churches to be more pro-feminist and pro-LGBTQ. And by teaching these things to their church, they're destroying the foundations of the church, because this country was built on Judeo-Christian values, and those Judeo-Christian values tell you that women should be subordinate to the patriarch, and that LGBTQ people are go against the nature of God, and so therefore are like sinful, and like all the shit that is Christian supremacy, Michael Fallon believes. And yet look at all these videos. We got Hegel and dialectic. So here is Michael O'Fallon having a chit chat with James Lindsay. This is the video I was showing where he looks a little more relaxed here. Look, they're chilling on a beach.
Of our ethnicities.
You know, so here's James Lindsay and Michael O'Fallon, just, you know, two bros just chilling on the beach having a conversation about critical race theory. When again, Michael O'Fallon is a part director of the website that James Lindsay runs. So he has a part stake in what James Lindsay does. He's funding him. He's using his money to fund James Lindsay to promote the idea of critical race theory and critical theory being infectious and taking over everywhere. And he's using it to promote the idea that we need to get back to our Christian foundation, start a new Christian society that is nationalistic and gets like goodbye to Muslims, goodbye to every other religious group out of the country. America was a Christian nation and it should remain a Christian nation. And James Lindsay fucking works with them. Like, it's just like at this point, you're like, all the shit that he's saying in the video we're watching, and yet he's willing to throw that all away and go, fuck it. You know what's worse? You know, Christian supremacy, it's over, it's done. I will work with the person advocating for Christian supremacy just because some women got mad at me at atheist conferences. This guy has no fucking principles. It's really of just like, I'm just upset about people. And then he gets that like expression on his face. But the thing is, and I feel like a lot of Lindsay supporters will look at me and be like, well, I don't care that he has some connections to these Christian people. Maybe the Christian people are right. And it's like, if you can't see why it's an inherent contradiction to what he's saying here, that's on you.
Among the latter category.
Yes.
The more negative, the view that new atheism is really trying to eliminate a problem. It has a negative goal, and once that goal is achieved, there's nowhere further to take it. Atheism shouldn't become a source of identity. It doesn't offer any guidance regarding how to act. It really just tells you what not to do and what not to believe.
Right. And so what you could actually see, and it's a crude division, it's not accurate, and it doesn't even necessarily apply in any given individual. but you could very broadly separate into the rationalists. So you want to think of like two distributions with lots of overlap. Sorry, math people, or non-math people.
Oh,
But
non-math people.
you have
just
people who are
cannot
interested in, I
comprehend
called them the
two
rationalists,
distributions.
and then the social justice group, which would be more accurate to say that you had the rationalists and the critics, if we broke
The
down
word
to
is too
slightly
big.
older historical.
Yeah. Look here. I'll even look for the
What
people
math
who are having
do?
a hard time. Look, so two distributions. So that means like we got one distribution here. See, so we got a distribution. Okay. Oh, I can't. It's hard to reverse the cake. Okay, we distribution there, and then I drew another distribution. Two distributions. Okay. We got one. Whoop.
Two big numbers.
I'm sorry for all the math nerds at
many.
home are the only ones who understand what I just did on the piece of paper here. But I just had to point that out.
Historical categories, those going back, say, to Marx. You had the people who were approaching it, say, no, let's use rationalism, let's maximize rationalism, let's approach this from a point where we're favoring rationalism, and then you had the people that were going to do critique. And some of that critique, of course, was deserved, some of that critique was valid, some of that critique was unfair, and some of that critique falls directly into the category of critique that Marx outlined. Not to say it was Marxist, I don't want to give that misimpression, but in the sense that Marx said ruthless critique of everything that exists is what's necessary. And so it had that Marxian spirit, which isn't the same thing as it being,
I do
totally
love that
communists
line.
necessarily, although some of them certainly were communists. And
Some of them certainly were communists. Oh no, my camera froze. I was gonna. Here we go.
That silly Marx and his communism.
I love like the point. So in the next video, they were gonna harp on that line about the ruthless critique thing, and I think what we're gonna do is listen to the last minute or less than a minute of this, and then read that Marx quote in context with and see how scary Marx was when he wrote that.
think there's enough
Hell
of
yeah. I
a
love a
break
scary
there. And like I
Marx.
said, everybody kind of played a little bit. When Christopher Hitchens would very famously get up and just start railing upon the problematics that religion generated, he's playing critique. And liberalism, of course, can use critique to some degree, and critique can try to use liberalism, except that critique tends to set itself explicitly as anti-liberal. So there's some overlap between the two. But I think that it's fair to say that you had people whose general drive was toward rationalism as like their primary reason for doing this. And then there were people whose primary drive was critique. And many of those people were people who felt like they'd been badly oppressed by the church, especially if they were women or gay. Or people who were going to then speak up on those people's behalves. And the people who were doing critique were explicitly advocating that what they were doing was social justice. In their words, the goal was social justice.
Atheism plus.
Atheism plus.
Oh no, atheism.
That's the end?
That's the end.
That's the big conclusion? Oh no, they wanted social justice.
Well, part of like, I mean, this gets into the meat of like what I mean, even what he said. What did he say? He said that like critique lends itself as or sort of like feeds into being anti-liberal. And like there's an element in which I have to say like sort of in the sense that if you listen to the earlier things that James Lindsay said in that conversation, he said that critique was used to get us from so Martin Luther like to critique the Roman Catholic Church and to move, and so you have these critical movements that fight the hegemonic power structures and like move away. And so there was this transition away from feudalism, monarchy, towards a more liberal democratic model. And in that sense, critique was not illiberal because it was moving from one system to another. So right now, liberal democracy in many ways and capitalism are the hegemonic structures of today. And so yes, if critique exists today, it's likely to like move past those dominant structures to not those structures, you know? So that the question that you have to ask, the more important question that like I never see Lindsay address in any of these discussions, which is like, why would that be bad? And I frame that at the beginning of going like, this is what they think will happen. So he's like, it'll be bad because it'll lead to Soviet communism. It'll be bad because it just leads to conflict and people getting mad at each other. It'll be bad because individualism good, group collectives bad. It'll be bad because nurture isn't real, we're all just nature, you know? Just like typical, it all lends back to some sort of like typical conservative talking points about what conservatives think human beings are. So he's just reiterating conservative presuppositions for why wanting to move past liberalism or the current hegemonic structure of liberalism is bad. Even though like there's probably things of liberalism that might remain, and liberalism in the like the grand sense of the Enlightenment project and stuff like this. So no, there's nothing inherent in wanting to move past our hegemonic structures today that says that we're going to get rid of everything. You know.
Hello, my rebels. Hello, my rebels. I'm a good boy. I'm a weirdo.